Get this show back on the road. I now welcome officers from the Bureau of Meteorology and welcome Dr. Andrew Johnson, Chief Executive Officer and Director of Meteorology. Would you care to make an opening statement, Dr. Johnson?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. I would also just like to note that you have advised of your intention to conclude your term. So may we wish you all the very, very best in your next great adventure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time with this committee.
Thank you.
So, who'd like to start? Senator Davey?
I'm happy to.
Fire away.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and I too note that your announcement to step down, which will see the end of quite a long tenure with the Bureau, which is lucky because all of my questions actually are covered by your tenure at the Bureau. We have been consistently asking over the last number of years about the information you provide, the Bureau provides, and the funding that you're given. And I note my colleague Senator Pocock here has been very curious about robust, so I'll leave most of those questions to you. But I want to bring your I want to discuss the findings of the Auditor General report into the Bureau's management of assets in its observing network, or more likely potentially mismanagement. And I want to follow the timeline because this is quite an interesting, the report was quite enlightening, quite revealing. And according to the report, the Bureau drafted a strategic asset management plan, which was issued in September 2018. Is that correct?
I believe so, Senator, yes.
And the Strategic Asset Management Plan, known as the SAMP, found amongst other things an ageing asset base, a lack of reference to baseline asset information, inconsistent asset management processes, and a disparate legacy recording system. Given those identifiers were identified then, what immediate steps were taken to rectify those weaknesses in the asset maintenance and management program?
Yeah, so thanks for your question, Senator, and I'm pleased you asked about the audit. It's probably worth, if it would be helpful for this committee, just to set some context for the audit as well, just so we're clear about its scope and so forth. The Bureau's network is extensive. We have nearly 15,000 assets distributed around the country, and these assets operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, often in some very hostile conditions. The audit didn't look at the performance of those assets. It focused very much on planning and documentation matters. And I think, as you would see from our annual report and other documents, the asset network itself is very reliable. And so the audit didn't find any deficiencies whatsoever in how those assets performed or how they're maintained or repaired. And so I think...
Because I understand the solar measurement instruments have failed to return data for almost 5 years. So... that is a failing, is it not?
It made no findings at all about the performance of the assets. And in fact, it found that the Bureau had an effective enterprise asset management system. So, to go to your question, many years ago, at the start of my tenure, we initiated a series of reforms to the way in which our observing assets were managed, and the audit has basically occurred in situ as that process of continuous improvement has occurred. So the asset management plans that you refer to didn't exist when I arrived at the Bureau. There's been a comprehensive effort to develop 9-year plans for each of our asset classes. Those asset plans are part of a layered, a nested approach to the way in which we manage our observing assets, and those asset management plans inform investment management decisions that the Bureau makes every year.
So the ANAO report found that your draft inventory management plan remained a draft for over 2 years. It found that the enterprise asset management system rolled out in 2021 is not. You have said in May 2024 that you could not rely on the information provided by the enterprise asset management system. As I said, there's reports that the solar measurement instruments are failing to return data, and the ANAO report has found that you've failed to report against the funding that was specifically provided to you for the asset management program. So you're sitting here saying nothing to see here.
No, I'm not saying that at all, Senator. The audit did find it had 4 recommendations which we agree with and will implement, and those recommendations focused on planning and documentation matters. They did not pertain to the practical in-field management of the observing assets. I'm not sure where the comment that you mentioned about saying that the enterprise asset management system is not effective, because it is, and the ANAO did explicitly find that. I can find the reference to that in the report if that would be helpful for you. The update, certainly the updating of a lot of that documentation, we take that feedback from the ANAO on board. It's an area where we've been attempting to bring all of that documentation up to date. And as I said, it forms the core of their recommendations, which we've agreed to, and we'll action them as they've requested.
I mean, your reading of this report and my reading of this report are quite different interpretations. And talking about EAMS, that is specifically page 37 of the report, and paragraph 2.65 on page 37 says, and I quote, "In May 2024, the Bureau advised the ANAO that it is not yet able to rely on information from the EAMS to report accurately on the performance of assets in its observing network."
Yeah. Well, I'd need to review that statement again. I may ask my colleague, Ms Brinsmead, I hope is online, because we do have folks interstate coming. She may wish to comment specifically on that statement.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Nicole Brinsmead, Group Executive Data and Digital and the Chief Information and Technology Officer. So currently the Enterprise Asset Management System is used for asset management and the maintenance of our asset management network. The data we collect is not specifically related to the performance of the actual assets themselves in terms of availability.
So what is the purpose of it then, if it's not to identify assets?
It's how we manage the assets, so in terms of what maintenance regimes, what's the life cycle, what work orders, and it holds documentation in relation to the configuration and location of those assets, so it holds all the metadata associated with those assets as well.
So when an asset is identified as not working to spec, how is that then managed and rectified? Because another aspect of the report was that not all maintenance notifications are resolved within this time frame targeted by the Bureau.
Yeah, so overall the asset management system tracks the maintenance regime of the asset, but it also tracks the work orders that we initiate if a return to service is required. So we have monitoring on our the assets, and if there is a disruption in data or there's a notification that an asset's not working, that is notified to us, and then a work order is actually opened up in the asset management system, and then that's tracked to closure once the asset's been returned to service. So that's what we use, the asset management system. It doesn't specifically manage the uptime, or it doesn't monitor the uptime of the asset. That's a different system that we use that for.
We're going to rotate the call, Senator Davey. Do you want to wrap up there?
I'll come back to the funding side of the ANAO, so I'm happy to rotate the call.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'll follow up some of the points that Senator Davies been raising, but I want to go to you, Minister, as the Minister representing the relevant Minister. Minister Plibersek was reported in early February that she had sought an urgent meeting on financial management at the Bureau of Meteorology after it was revealed that hundreds of millions of dollars in maintenance funds had been used to cover cost overruns. The Minister said publicly that the ANAO report shows, and I'm quoting, I think, there need to be better systems and processes in the organisation. Has that meeting, the briefing that Minister Plibersek talked about, occurred?
I'll seek some advice and see if I can come back to you in a few minutes.
Maybe Dr Johnson can tell me whether that meeting occurred.
I'm very happy to speak to it. And firstly, Senator, the premise of your question...
I'm asking you whether the meeting occurred, Dr Johnson.
I'm in the process of answering your question. The premise of your question is flawed in the first place. The statement...
I'm going to come to the issue
you make is incorrect.
Of the misplacement of funds, but I'd just like to have a meeting with the Minister.
That statement is incorrect. There has been no misplacement of funds, and yes... I've certainly met with the Minister, as I've done during my tenure, so this notion that there's been some misdirection or misdirection of funds is false. I couldn't be any clearer with that.
We'll come back to that.
I'd be happy to, yeah.
Minister, that meeting did occur, it seems. Are you aware of whether the Minister sought Dr Johnson's resignation?
I certainly haven't been briefed that anything like that occurred.
Mr Johnson, did you offer your resignation?
No, I did not, Senator.
What was learned at that meeting, Minister, about financial management at the Bureau of Meteorology, particularly in relation to the use of management funds to cover cost overruns as detailed in the ANAO report on the Bureau?
Well, I think that the Chief Executive Officer has started to respond to some of those assertions that you've made, and I expect Senator Davies is going to come to some of those issues in her questions as well. I'm simply not in a position to add any more detail. I mean, officials may be able to, but I'm not in a position to add any more detail, not because I'm trying to be unhelpful, but we'll take on notice anything that we might be able to provide you in relation to that.
The ANAO report is clear in pointing to a range of maintenance shortfalls in the Bureau of Meteorology for the period in which it did its review. So when you look to recruiting as a government to replace Dr Johnson, will you be putting as a government emphasis on financial and project management skills, given the cost blowouts and critical delays that are reported in relation to both Robust program and the Australis 2 project?
Well, I understand a series of assertions have been made about the ANAO report. I haven't been given the benefit.
I'm particularly asking about Robust and Australis 2 in this question.
I haven't been given the benefit of reading that report, but the government's approach will be to recruit somebody to this position at the appropriate time who's got all of the skills that are necessary to run this important organisation. I don't think I could say much more than that.
And will you ensure that no person who has been found to have deliberately misled a federal court will be appointed to that position?
It sounds like the kind of thing that would Well, I'm just not sure of the context.
Well, there is context to that question.
Well, I'd hope so, but I'm not aware of it.
And would you think it appropriate to appoint someone who had been charged by a federal court to have been deliberately misled by them to be in a senior leadership position?
Well, I'm just not aware of the context that you're talking about, Senator Pocock, so I'm reluctant to express a view.
I'll put that question perhaps on notice to the Minister. What is the date, if I can ask you, Dr Johnson, on which your resignation becomes effective?
The 12th of September.
And does that constitute the completion of the full term of your current contract?
No.
How far short of your current contract is the 12th of September?
Approximately 1 year.
1 year. And will you be active in the role to that date, or are there periods of leave or secondment or other periods of absence?
It's my intention to work till the 12th of September.
Okay, thank you. If I can go then specifically to the ANAO report, a recent report in the Saturday paper dated the 1st of September this year says that the Bureau of Meteorology has been using hundreds of millions of dollars guaranteed specifically for proactive maintenance of its ageing weather observing system to prop up the agency's deteriorating financial position and cover cost overruns on major technology rollouts. That's a direct quote. The article also points to the ANAO report which it terms scathing, given that the Auditor-General says the Bureau has failed to account for all of its money allocated to maintenance and to complete adequately its maintenance program. Do you believe the Bureau has spent money intended for asset maintenance on anything other than asset maintenance?
So, Senator, the premise of your question, the statement that you've made from the Saturday paper, they are false. And maybe it would help you and the committee if I could explain the purposes for which the monies that are being referred to in public commentary were appropriated. So when the Robust program was funded, and as you will recall, it was funded in 3 tranches, when the final tranche was considered in the 2021 budget, another measure was considered as part of that submission, which was a funding allocation to sustain the benefits of the Robust program. Okay, so that was announced in the 2021 budget. Funds to sustain the benefits of the Robust program, which include a whole range of things, including the observing system assets, started to commence in 21-22 at a small level, increased a little bit more in 22-23, and then ramped up to their full intended expenditure levels in 23-24. So just to be crystal clear with you, those funds were intended to sustain the benefits of the Robust program, which included security and stability of the Bureau's IT and OT systems, which includes, but doesn't exclude other things, includes our observing assets, but also includes other things as well, models, technology, high-performance computing and so forth. When it became clear that the Robust program was likely to take longer than anticipated and to cost more than anticipated, we commenced discussions with the central agencies about what our options were to deal with the shortfall in funding, and you're well aware of what that shortfall is. Based on those discussions with the central agencies, it was agreed that the Bureau wouldn't put in a submission back into budget to cover the shortfall, that it was a legitimate use of those sustainment funds, the funds appropriated for the sustainment of Robust, to be used to contribute to the Bureau's core base funding. So everything we've done with respect to our funding has been with the full agreement, the full consultation with the Department of Finance and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. So the statements made that the Bureau somehow, and the inference that the Bureau somehow mismanaged public funds, diverted funds for the purposes which they're not intended, is false, is completely false. And everything that we've done with respect to our finances has been with the full agreement, concurrence and close involvement of the central agencies.
Senator Pocock, we're going to take a break for the afternoon, for the evening tea, and we'll come back at 9:30 with the Bureau of Meteorology. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Bureau of Meteorology, and we will go to Senator Davey.
Thank you very much. Dr. Johnson, you responded to Senator Pocock that the 21-22 budget or extra budget was to sustain benefits of the robust program. Are you talking about the 225.6 million over 3 years that then transferred to 143 million per year ongoing? Is that the...
So the funding quanta for the sustainment funding, as I said before, the decision was made in the 2021 budget, and there were no funds appropriated that year. In the 21-22 budget, there was 3,034 in capital, 14,381 in operating. In 22-23, there was 12,672 in capital, 52,449 in operating, and then in 23-24, when the full ramp up started to occur, 73,850 in capital and 68,727 in operating, and it's intended at that level with indexation to continue as an ongoing measure.
So when the ANAO reports that in the 2020-21 federal budget, the Australian government increased the Bureau's overall funding to ensure the financial sustainability of the Bureau and included 225.6 million over 3 years from 21-22 and 143.7 million per year ongoing from 24-25 to maintain a proactive asset maintenance schedule consistent with industry best practice. You're saying that was all rolled into one, and it is your claim that you did not need to report on that separately.
So, Senator, those funds that were appropriated in the 2021 budget were appropriated to sustain the benefits of the robust program, and the decision at the time was that they would be absorbed and integrated and incorporated within the Bureau's baseline funding. So the reporting of that...
Does the ANAO not mention robust in association with that funding at all, given they are the audit office and they are looking at the governance and tracking of federal funds? And they say that that funding was to maintain proactive asset maintenance schedule.
That was part...
And their complaint is that the Bureau is not monitoring or reporting on the relationship between the federal budget funding and the maintenance schedule.
So, Senator, I encourage you to direct those questions to the ANAO. What I can say to you categorically is that those funds that I just walked you through were funds that were appropriated in the 2021 budget. The decision of Cabinet at that time was that those funds would be absorbed into the Bureau's baseline budget. There was no requirement to report separately on them. They would be reported as part of our corporate plan and our annual report. And there's also an important thing that you said there again, I'd just like to correct, that those funds were not sustainability funds. They were funds to sustain the benefits of the robust program. And as we've talked about in this committee, those benefits around security, stability and resilience of the Bureau's ICT and observing systems. So part of those funds, yes, were designed to support the Bureau's observing network, but those funds are also designed and intended to support running costs for our high-performance computing, for broader technology platforms, for our scientific models, a whole range of things of which the observing systems are one.
So the modelling you undertook in 2019-20 to estimate the costs over time to maintain and replace all assets based on the asset's installation date, that then you took to government to request additional funding, was that designed...
So there was a business case done to support that budget decision, which had a whole range of dimensions to it, as I've just outlined to you, of which the observing systems are one. And the budget decision that was made in the 2021 budget was based on the figures that were in that business case. And that business case included, and the budget decision also included, indexation over time. So they were our estimates at the time of
And
what
that-
the costs of maintaining that assets
My reading
would
of
be.
the ANAO report is that business case was about maintenance and replacement of assets.
Senator,
It doesn't talk about robust.
No, it doesn't. But this is
But
a really
you
important
have
point.
you have then interpreted the funding.
No,
parcel.
it's not an interpretation. Well, this is a really important point, and the commentary that's been made in the public domain is fundamentally wrong and misinformed.
Well, where was it reported and agreed with the minister?
Senator Davey, I've been listening to the exchange. I just think you have to let the official finish answering the question before you move to the next. I know that you're anxious to move on to the next part, but he is trying to explain. I've heard him try 3 times now to try and explain this point. I don't know what it is, but I haven't been engaged in these issues. I just ask that you let him finish his responses before you press on with questions.
So, Senator, just to be crystal clear, the sustainment funding is to sustain the benefits of robust. The robust investment didn't apply to the entirety of the Bureau's operations either. So, again, for the avoidance of any doubt, that sustainment funding is designed to support a range of things in the Bureau, of which the some of the observing assets are part of it, but by no means all. And so I don't know why the ANAO didn't refer to that in their report. Their scope's very clear, and as you'll see in the front of the report what their scope is. But I can assure you we're using those sustainment funds for the purposes which they're intended. And everything we've done with the use of that funding, we have by agreement in writing from the Department of Finance. So we've behaved entirely appropriately in the deployment of those funds.
So there would be somewhere in writing an agreement that explains that this particular bucket of funding that, according to the ANAO, was to maintain proactive asset maintenance schedule was part of a broader, robust package. That would be
a broader
writing.
package designed to sustain the benefits of robust, yes. That information is available.
Can you
certainly, certainly, and this is where the public commentary is entirely misinformed, frankly, on the purposes of that funding. This is on the record as part of a budget decision, and as I said before, everything we've done with respect to those sustainment funds has been with the full concurrence of the central agencies.
And to be fair, as I said from the outset, Dr Johnson, we in this committee across party lines have been asking questions about robust, about funding, about cost blowouts for several years now, and we continue to get a bit of a runaround. We've got an ANAO report that is quite scathing in their findings about your asset maintenance and management regime. We've got farmers who've lost money because they're questioning, and on the back of this report, they're now questioning whether they can actually have confidence in forecasting and the observation network of the Bureau.
Senator, can I respond to that? Because again, I think there are a whole range of things that are being conflated, and I'd point you to the actual performance of our networks, which I think are astounding, really, given the incredibly harsh environment in which those 15,000 plus assets have to operate. So when you think about the critical Tier 1 assets, our automatic weather stations, which record rainfall, our radars, they're all above 95% uptime, and they've been at that level for as long as I can remember, and in fact in some years up to 97 plus. So if you actually look at the performance of the network, it's very high, and that, as you correctly point out, that performance of that network's vital in terms of the services we delivered. So I would say to you and to your constituents that judge us on the performance record. It's been strong for a sustained period of time. Yes, we're on a maturity journey in terms of our documentation, but if I could just point you to the facts of the performance of the network, particularly those critical systems like the radar network, like the automatic weather station network and so on, their uptime's been very high.
I won't mention, I know that you don't own all the flood gauges at the moment, but the flood warning system has been lacking for a while. And did you just say you're on a maturity journey in terms of documentation?
Yes.
How old is the Bureau?
Well, Senator, I can only say to you that when I arrived, there was almost a very low maturity in our systems, and so we've started that process of improving the way we document and manage our assets. We have a lot of things that have needed to be done in the Bureau in recent years. I wish that we'd have it completed earlier. The ANAO's pointed out, it's pointed out in its findings that in many of the things we do, we're not fully effective. They have pointed out we're partly effective. So I don't interpret it that the system's broken. It points out that we've just got work to do, and we agree with that, and that's what we're doing. But I also say, because again, there's been commentary around the performance of the network and people not having confidence in it. I'm just looking here at the latest statistics. 99.2% uptime for satellite data feeds, 98.6% for wind profilers, 98.5% from automatic weather stations, 96.2% for weather radars, and 95% for the flood warning network that we own. And as you know, we both share this passion in common. There's a huge footprint of assets out there that we don't own, whose performance isn't great, and we're working hard to address that situation as well.
We're just going to need to rotate the call. We'll go to Senator Rennick.
Just in regards to the solar management instruments have returned no data to stakeholders for almost 5 years. What is that in relation to? Is that measuring atmospheric temperature, or what's a solar measurement instrument?
Thanks for the question. If you like, the day-to-day solar measurements are done via satellite.
Yeah.
And the ground stations are used for calibration and validation of the satellite images.
Yeah. Okay, so what's then not, when it says no measurement instruments have returned no data, what do you mean? What does that mean? It's returned no data to who? You're not recording it, or what does it mean?
Yeah, no. So customers, the data that customers want is the stuff from the satellites.
Right.
So that keeps coming.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, so there's a smallish number of ground stations that you use to calibrate and validate the satellite data.
Right.
Yeah. So because the satellite calibration and validation is very stable, you don't actually need a whole heap of the ground measurements in order to make sure you're getting the right data out of the satellites.
Okay, you still got me confused here. So are you telling me that you're not reconciling the ground data to the satellite data?
We do, but we don't do it every day.
But it's saying you haven't done it for 5 years.
Yeah, no, that's not quite...
Is that not correct?
It's not quite correct, no.
So you don't do it every day, but there's a big difference between you don't do it every day and 5 years. So where's the truth here? What is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be frank.
Right.
So for the ground stations, the data is fundamentally used to calibrate and validate the satellites, and that function is effectively met.
Right, okay, because that then comes back to a report that was done back in 2011 about ways to improve your observation data, and it said you should have multiple thermometers at each weather station so that you can check for redundancy. So you have redundancy, and you can calibrate between the thermometers.
Yeah.
How many thermometers do you use on average at a weather station? Just the one or two?
No, I understand it's 2.
Are you sure about that?
No, I'm not.
You're not?
Sorry. We could bring in Carl Braganza.
I guess the reason why I asked that, if you're not calibrating every day back to the satellite data, because this is the point, right? We need to know the margin of error on these figures, because that same report back in 2011 had a margin of error of plus or half a minus degree. So we're talking a whole degree. And
yeah, sorry, talking lots and lots of different things here. So like loads of different things. So the satellite data that I referred to for measuring solar insolation across the whole country, what it does, it tells you at any point that you would like to know what the solar radiation hitting the landscape is. Yep.
Yeah.
If you have solar stations, you only get a measurement where that station is. Yep.
Right. Okay.
So they're for the purpose of calibrating the number. If you like, the satellite just gives you a bunch of numbers, and you need to turn those numbers into a solar energy figure, and that's what the ground stations are used for. Temperature data, completely different. Completely different thing.
Okay, so this article in the Saturday paper seems to imply that spending and delivery of quality assurance on actual outcomes, measuring data, is being underdone. I guess my question to you is, what's your ratio of employees at the Bureau of Meteorology that's involved in recording the weather and actually maintaining quality assurance over actual observations versus the number of people in the climate division that model and do things like homogenisation? Do you have a quick, an overview of what you break up between your staff and the money that's spent between these two? Because one's modelling and one's actual.
Maybe I can make a general statement, Senator. We have many hundreds of people in our data and digital group. Miss Brinsmead, who's online, can give you the exact numbers of people that we have.
And the data and digital group, is that actual?
Have involved in maintenance.
Right.
Peter can answer this in a minute, but we spend more on maintenance of our observing assets in the Bureau at the moment than we've done at any time since I've been here. So we have.
Okay, so my question to you is, what's the ratio between maintenance and actual upkeep of the instruments that record?
We'd have to do the numbers on that, but we have a very small team. Peter might want to elaborate here. You go ahead.
Thanks. Just on the measurement accuracy for temperature, just to be clear, so I know in the past we've discussed measurement tolerance of the equipment. That's the maximum allowable error. Okay, it's not the actual error, it's the maximum that's allowed. When we actually look at the uncertainty of temperature measurement, it's very low. We estimate that to be 0.04 of a degree. 0.084 of a degree.
Okay, and is that because you have 2 thermometers at each weather station?
Well, they get calibrated at least twice a year. Yeah.
So how many? Yeah, but that's the point. To calibrate, you've got to have you've got to match one against the other because you've got nothing to calibrate
you
against.
don't calibrate thermometers by having 2 out in the field. Yeah, they could both drift. Yeah, so you have reference thermometers that you use,
right?
And our technicians go out and actually calibrate the thermometers using.
But that was the recommendation in this peer review back in 2011, was that you have 2 thermometers so that if you, for redundancy, if one breaks down, and as it says here, there's 10% of planned maintenance doesn't take place, 43% of these incidents do not meet agency targets, mean time to restore, which means if something breaks down, you've got gaps in your data series. So that's why it's pushing for 2 thermometers at every weather station.
Yeah, I'll just say, with that independent review from 2011, we've met all but one of the recommendations there, and that's the one around digitisation.
So if you met them all, you'd have 2 at every weather station, is that correct?
Met them all.
So how come you didn't know that before?
Well, I've answered the question in a different way. I know that we've met all except one of the requirements of the independent review.
Well, I don't want to take up too much time. So I guess my question is you're the CEO, Mr Johnson. You do, I presume, monthly management accounts here where you're looking at front end, the expenditure you're spending on actual upkeep of collecting real data, and then you have your model data, your homogenised data that is based off the real data set. Now, your model data is only going to be good as the real data that you collect, garbage in, garbage out, right? So what is the proportion of expenditure between actually upkeep at the Bureau of Meteorology and what I call homogenised?
We'll take that on notice, Senator.
But wouldn't you have a rough idea of that in your head?
Well, we're talking about a $700 million business. I don't have the exact numbers. I'd rather give you a correct answer rather than speculate here.
Okay.
But as I said in my general comments, we have a very large team that is involved, and an excellent team, I might add, dedicated people who sustain our assets at a very high level of performance, and a very small team that deals with the issues that you're referring to. So I don't know the exact ratio, but we'll take it on notice. And
how many employees all up, the Bureau?
Right now we have 1,722 in our ASL. At December, I think that number is.
And what's your annual budget?
About 7. It depends on how you count it, but around between 700 and 800 million, depending on which term you use. Yeah.
Okay, and that most of that robust project is on the actual.
Robust is closed. So it closed last 30 June. So robust no longer exists.
Okay, but the purpose of that was to upgrade actual.
No, the purpose of robust was to look at the security, stability, and resilience of the Bureau's IT and OT. So
that was back-end expenditure.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by back-end expenditure.
your front end is recording all the data and then you're storing it in
So
IT
the Bureau
servers.
has a whole range of information and observing technologies. Robust was designed to be a comprehensive injection to make those systems secure, stable and resilient, and it funded a whole range of activities in the Bureau, both operating expenditure and capital expenditure.
Okay.
So that program has finished, and going back to the questions from Senator Davey and Senator Pocock, in the 2021 budget we were appropriated funds to sustain the benefits of the Robust program with the view, the government of the day took the view that the reason why Robust was needed in the first place was many, many years of underinvestment in the Bureau, and the investment in the sustainment funding was to hopefully avoid being in that same situation that we found ourselves in late 2015, early 2016, where the Bureau's systems had been compromised by a state actor, and we'd had a number of, I wasn't there at the time, but apparently a number of major system outages.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
So that's what Robust is for.
Okay,
and,
cool.
and the sustainment money is for.
No worries. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to the question of spending on maintenance versus robust. I'm looking at the 2020-21 budget paper, which has an item, Bureau of Meteorology, Improved Security and Resilience, which says the government will provide $254.6 million over 4 years from 2021 to ensure the financial sustainability of the Bureau of Meteorology. This includes $225.6 million over 3 years from 2021-22 and $143.7 million per year ongoing from 24-25, quote, to maintain a proactive asset maintenance schedule consistent with industry best practice and allow the Bureau to safely respond to multiple concurrent weather emergency events during times of natural disaster. You said, Mr Johnson, I think, that you had clear written support for using funds for Robust. Can you give us...
Senator, again, you're mistaken in your commentary.
I'm not making a
please
comment.
don't verbal me.
I'm asking...
I'd like
Johnson.
I'd like to actually...
I'd like to finish my question.
You could just allow Senator Pocock to finish her question.
I heard you say to Senator Davey, and please correct me if I have misunderstood, that you had clear evidence in support of the use of funds for Robust out of that budget. That's the only item I can see for that. So have I misunderstood?
Yes, you have, and I'll try and explain it again. So
I'm asking you for the evidence that you say exists.
I'd like to explain, because the premise of your question is inaccurate. So the Bureau received funding for the Robust program, originally $788 million, starting in the 2017 budget, I think it was. It was funded in 3 tranches, 3 different budgets, and that funding was a discrete block of funding that concluded in June 2024. That's one package of funding.
With additional funding, of course, along the way.
No, we didn't get any additional funding. This is the key point. So we had the choice when we knew that Robust was going to cost us more than what we originally intended when we went to Cabinet in 2017. We had the choice of either going back to government and asking for supplementation, and as part of those discussions with the central agencies, it was agreed that the preferred way forward was to use the funds that were appropriated in 2021, a separate decision, a separate but related decision of Cabinet, to fund those, I think those numbers, I haven't done the maths, but those numbers that you said sound correct, to sustain, that funding was there to sustain the benefits of a Robust program. The central agencies agreed that the preferred way forward was for us to draw down on those monies to cover the cost, the extra cost of Robust, in lieu of returning back to Cabinet for a decision. And so those monies didn't come online straight away. They ramped up very slowly, and so the numbers I read out to Senator Davey, in that year that the decision was made, no funding came to the Bureau, it was zero. And then in 21-22 we got a small bit of funding, and then in 2022-23 it ramped up a little bit further, and then in 23-24 it ramped up to the numbers that I quoted, and then there's that ongoing funding that you referred to. So I think you're conflating two separate but related issues. And so we absolutely have it in writing from the central agencies because it was a decision point. One of the options could have been to go, when we knew that robust was going to cost more, to go back to Cabinet and ask for supplementation. And with the agreement and the advice from the central agencies was that was not the preferred approach, that we would draw down on that sustainment funding because the purposes for which the sustainment funding were intended were to sustain the benefits in robust, and robust was already delivering benefits. So their perspective was this was a legitimate view, a legitimate use of those funds. So that is documented. I can assure you it is.
Could you provide that documentation to this committee, please? I want to go now to 3.15 in the ANAO report.
3.1.
3.15 in that report, which says in that budget,
Sorry,
20...
What page are you looking at?
I'm not sure what page it is.
When you say 3.15...
Paragraph, you know how they are numbered as paragraphs, 3.15.
Just bear with me, so we're looking at the same thing. I can't find a 3.15, Senator.
It's a paragraph that begins in the 2020-21...
Oh, I'm sorry, I've just found it. There's some confusing numbering here. Yes, I think we've got it.
So this is the ANAO saying that in that federal budget, the government increased the Bureau's overall funding to ensure, and they're basically repeating the words I just quoted from the budget. This included $225.6 million over 3 years to ensure, from 2021, to maintain a proactive asset maintenance schedule consistent with industry best practice. The funding model involved an annual increase in both capital and operating funding between 21-22 and 23-24, at which point the planned ongoing level of funding is set at $143.7 million per year across all assets within the Bureau. Did the Bureau ever end up developing a proactive asset maintenance schedule consistent with industry best practice as that budget line and the ANO believe you should have?
So, yes, we have, and I'll ask Ms Brismead to comment. We do have a very active planning process around active maintenance of the Bureau's assets. I think the thing I need to point out to you is that, and again, we had long discussions with the ANO about this, the Bureau does have long-term asset plans. Those asset plans are reflected in our budget. Sometimes those plans need to be adjusted as circumstances arise. So if I can give you a couple of examples, we had a cyclone go through the Pilbara a couple of years ago and took out a radar. Just before Christmas, we had a radar northwest of Townsville at Greenvale that was hit multiple times by lightning. So these are unanticipated events where we have to modify our maintenance schedules to bring essential equipment back online and cannot be foreseen in our planning, right? So to the best extent we can, we bring that planning, those 9-year asset management plans into our budget planning cycle. But from year to year, there will be variances and adjustments depending on what happens in the environment, or flood gauges get washed away, or whatever it is. We have to make operational decisions that reflect the reality of the environment we're in.
Dr Johnson, do you, you tell me you had a lot of back and forward with the ANAO. Do you believe the ANAO report, which does raise very serious questions in my mind, and I think in the mind of this committee, does raise issues that should be of concern to you and to the Minister in terms of proper maintenance and appropriate expenditure on maintenance in the Bureau of Meteorology?
So, as I've said and attempted to say in previous answers, we have a very positive maintenance schedule. We have a proactive maintenance schedule.
No problems here?
We have. Could I please finish my answer, Senator? We have a proactive maintenance schedule, and we're seeking to manage those assets to that standard of industry best practice. That is our intent. I've acknowledged that the documentation around how we're doing that has room for improvement, and that's what the ANO recommendations focus on, and we've agreed with them. I direct you again to the actual performance of the network, which is very high. And when I look at our appropriations that we spend on maintenance and the training and various things that we do, we're spending more on maintenance in our asset network than we ever have. Now, there are going to be some times where our desire to achieve that industry best practice cannot be met because we have to take pragmatic actions to respond to an unanticipated or unforeseen event somewhere else in the network. But to the large extent, we're fulfilling, in my view, our obligations around that schedule. It's very challenging given the number of assets we've got, over 15,000 in the field, many of them in very remote locations, and we're doing our best. Our teams are doing their best. And as I said, the investment the Bureau has been making in maintenance on my watch has been increasing year on year, hasn't been decreasing. So, and this money that was appropriated to us will be very helpful in that regard. As I've also said in my previous answers, that money was designed for a whole range of purposes, not just maintenance of the asset network.
So I think we in the Senate place a lot of weight on the ANAO, and it's very important work. And we have a report which raises really serious concerns for me, and I hear you characterise them as problems of documentation. That really worries me in a very important part of the architecture of governance in Australia in a climate crisis. And I hear you characterise it as a problem of documentation, and the background to this is very significant. I know you will agree with this. Every Australian taxpayer will agree. A massive overrun on robust and serious concerns about spending that occurs within the Bureau of Meteorology, and that is why our questioning is forensic. And I don't think we're going to agree on this, but I think this is more than a documentation problem. But I want to go to another issue within the ANAO, which found that in November last year, the staffing level at national observing operation hubs across the Bureau were at just 78% of the target full-time equivalent level. So in my city, in Adelaide, 69% of the target of staffing and much less in both Sydney and Brisbane, respectively. This is a real concern, is it not, that we've got really well under the staffing levels that we need for this very important work? Why is that level of understaffing so low relative to targets?
I'll ask Ms Brismead, who runs that area, to answer your question, Senator.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. We acknowledge that currently the National Observing Operations Team is under its staffing allocation. Some of that is attributed to the challenges that we actually do have in recruiting appropriately skilled staff, particularly in some of those cities. So Sydney is particularly a city that's challenged. We find very challenging to recruit staff and have to go out to market on multiple occasions. So we currently have quite a lot of active recruitment underway to try and sort of build those staffing levels up. And then once we do, onboard new staff members, they have to go through the relevant training. So there's a lead time to when they're sort of useful. But there is also staff attrition. So keeping up with onboarding staff with staff departures is a constant challenge. And we are having challenges maintaining that level at 100%.
You have my sympathy in a difficult labour market. Am I allowed to go on with a further question? I know you will want to rotate.
No, you can go on.
Okay,
Please go ahead.
I want to go to a contract extension. In your answer to a question taken on notice at the previous hearing, question number SQ240000929, sorry, I'm sure you'll have it at your fingertips, you responded with information relating to 9 extensions to a contract you had with Accenture for work originally valued at $31 million, which eventually blew out to $75 million. Some of these extensions, you say, were simply to accommodate pre-existing contract options, but there were others where this is not stated as being the case. For example, amendments A6 and A7 together pushed up the price of the contract by $16,620,000. This, you told us, was due to unexpected complexity and scale of the build phase effort. Now, if we take amendments A1 to A4 into account, which were made for exactly the same reason, it adds to a further $5.4 million in the taxpayer's bill. The Australian public really is looking for some reassurance here, and certainly I am, as to why both the agency and the tenderer, in this case, the international consulting firm Accenture, underestimated the amount of effort required for this job to the tune of $22 million. To me, that's an enormous amount of effort. While we're at it, how can we have faith that we're getting value for money when none of this additional work is open for tender for smaller local firms, some of whom have told me they think these big international consulting firms are routinely taking the Australian government and taxpayers for a ride? And that's a massive change in the value of a contract. What's going on inside that?
So I'll ask Ms Wickham, who's in Melbourne, who heads our procurement. Senator, you went through that very quickly, so I'll just check, Michelle, whether you actually caught the contract that's, that the Senator's interested in. Maybe
yes,
if we could just repeat it, just to be sure we're talking about the same thing. Have you got it?
Yes, I have. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
Michelle Wickham, Acting General Manager, Portfolio Management. So all the robust contracts were undertaken through an open tender process, which means that anybody can apply for the work, and that those we had an independent probity advisor overseeing the procurement process for the open tenders. We used the AGS contract templates, and it was always envisaged that these contracts would have a design, build and run or support service phase for those contracts. As I think Ms Brinsmead and Dr Johnson have previously advised, the contract amendments, there was additional and unexpected complexity in the build phase. Effort required to investigate, design, build, test and deploy the technology components of the particular platform.
I might find that plausible if it was a mere 500,000, but we're talking not that. We're not talking 1 million, we're talking 22 million. How does that happen? It is such a monstrous shift. And for you, that I'm assuming when you talk about the initial contract being available to open tender, the massive ongoing contract variations are not available to open tender, are they not?
So obviously the work undertaken by the major vendors operates within our Bureau managed projects, and obviously their work, including the amount of effort required, is subject to close oversight by the contract manager, the project manager, and then the governance arrangements for each project. Any proposed change to the effort required to complete the deliverables operates under a defined change process. Changes may be based upon Bureau-initiated or vendor-initiated proposals. Any proposed amendment is considered by the Bureau's delivery and procurement teams for assessment, and if validated and supported, proposed to the delegate for decision. And then all amendments, inclusive of the total, are assessed for value for money.
So how do you monitor effort in that project, Ms Wickham?
So compensation, so in terms of how the contracts are actually constructed, some of them are based on different pricing approaches, and sometimes we have fixed price, and typically where we have a greater degree of certainty, but where there is risk or where the solution design and build follows a period of discovery, or where there are significant dependencies, effort-based pricing approaches are better suited. And this means that within the contract, at the tender time, labour rates were provided as part of an open tender process, and they were transparently agreed. So primarily the robust contracts included a mix of pricing elements, but are predominantly effort-based because of the relatively high degree of risk and uncertainty at the time of tendering.
So of the 9 subsequent amendments not subject to open tender, how many were initiated by Accenture and how many by the Bureau?
I would have to take that on notice, Senator, but as I've stated, any proposed amendment is agreed through a rate card that was agreed at the time of an open tender process.
And did the Bureau consider re-tendering at any moment additional work to ensure that value for money was maintained?
So the amendments to that contract were not re-tendered because we actually did an open and competitive market process overseen by an external probity advisor. Some of the amendments are pre-planned and pre-existing elements of the contract, and where amendments reflect an increase in the scale of effort required to complete the work, the scope of the requirement remains materially the same in which was tendered. Retendering would be materially more expensive at a whole of program level than completing the contracted works in flight, representing lower overall value for money and higher security risk, considering the total impacts on the program, schedule and costs.
I've got one more question. Do you want me to? Yep. Thank you for the answer. I must say I find it a really very mysterious that a contract goes from 31 to 75 million without any open process subsequent to the original tender. But I want to go to the question of whistleblowers. It's my final line of questioning, no doubt, to your relief. At the previous estimates hearing on the 8th of November last year, I asked in question SQ 24 000929 whether the Bureau keeps records of whistleblower incidents, which you took on notice, I think, Dr Johnson, and replied the Bureau does not publish information on whistleblower incidents. Has the Bureau, in the last 5 years, investigated any incidents of unauthorised sharing of information, including information being leaked to the media?
I think we've also answered that question as well in a related question on notice, but I might ask Ms Hewitt to come to the table to answer that question, Senator. I think Senator Doniam asked a question on notice about the matter around investigation of unauthorised. If I can just check, I think, and just while we're waiting for Ms Hewitt to come, Senator Doniam asked the question SQ 24 000926 around unauthorised commentary, and our answers there on the record. I'm happy to repeat it if it would be helpful for you, but it says the Bureau of Meteorology routinely monitors the use of its technology systems in line with the requirements of the government's protective security policy framework.
Have you investigated any incidents?
I've answered the question, Senator. We routinely monitor the use of our resources.
I'm not asking whether you routinely monitor. I'm asking whether you have investigated any.
I'm not aware of any formal investigations.
Okay, you have not investigated any incidents of unauthorised sharing of information, including information leaked to the media.
Astrid Heward, Group Executive Enterprise Services. There have not been any formal investigations of unauthorised leaks to the media.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And thanks for your answers.
Thank you very much for joining us today for another fun-filled evening.
Thank you.
We will now